Welcome back. South Africa's agricultural sector achieved a historic milestone in 2025, reaching a record $15.1 billion in exports. This performance marks the seventh consecutive year of growth for the industry, defying a significant trade dispute and a sharp decline in shipments to the United States. According to data from the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, AGBIS, the 10% year-on-year increase was driven by robust production volumes and favourable global commodity prices for South Africa's big hitters, including citrus, table grapes, wine and maize. Let's talk more about this with agricultural economist and National Agricultural Marketing Council, Tabile Nkunjana. Baba Nkunjana, thank you for your time and for joining us this morning. So as an agricultural economist, can you provide us just an overview of what we're seeing as South Africa's agricultural export performance in 2025, and what factors do you think contributed to this record $15.1 billion in US dollar exports?
Good morning to you, Katlego, and Newzroom Afrika viewers. Yeah, so we, for some people, we really did not, anticipate, the performance of the sector when we started 2025, and this was mainly because of what the current president in the US, the tariffs and everything that is happening around trade globally because of that. But luckily for South Africa, we've had a growth, or at least a good performance in terms of our exports for almost all the quarters of 2025. And then it became clear, towards the end of the year that it's very likely that we're going to get to the numbers that we are seeing as far as the export is concerned. And there has been, the real factor is that the commodities themselves, they were doing well, as you said. And also because we have had quite a larger production in terms of our outputs because of the good weather that you saw last year into a number of industries, including citrus, oranges, the mandarins and everything, lemons, and some apples across the fruit juices, are doing really well. And as a result, we saw the 10% increase in exports, which we eventually amounted to 15.1 billion in US dollars. And then if you turn that into rands, it amounted to around 277 billion.
Which is quite significant, especially looking at the slump in exports to the United States due to those tariff increases. I mean, South Africa's exports still reached these record high levels. How did the industry adapt to the challenges that it faced, especially with regards to US exports?
Yeah, so that's a very important point, Katlego, that you're making, which a lot of people, have been very worried about. But I would say that as much as we're experiencing the issue with the tariffs in the US, the reality is that South Africa has been really regularly pushing, for other markets. We have seen the agreement, couple of agreements we have made in the Asian countries, for different products. But also another thing is the fact that, when the actually tariffs kicked in the US, the products that will normally generate a lot of money or revenue through the US market, they were exported to that market. So when the tariffs kicked in, we have managed to really push. As a result, we saw exports, for instance, for citrus, getting to a record, despite the fact that that market, which is the US, was kind of very much not a stable one, as things would normally be before. And as much as we've seen, that decline, because the reality is that for last year, 2025, our export to the US market overall they are down by close to 40%, which is significant. In terms of the quarters, if you have to look for quarter 4 and quarter 3, it's down really significantly. But if you have to look in terms of the year, overall year, we are down around 3.5% somewhere there. So it's not bad. But one thing that helped, another key factor, was the fact that the commodities themselves, the volumes were and the commodity prices were really coming through for the sector, and which is why the tariffs that the US has imposed into South Africa did not really have the impact that a lot of us anticipated, which is why, I think even going forward, we're probably going to see this, even given the fact that now even the Chinese market is opening up for South Africa. So we're probably going to see this increase in our, exports overall, irrespective of what the US market, at the present moment is doing. But we are hopeful still that, it can, the things between South Africa and the US will settle down a little bit, if not removing the tariffs, perhaps reducing them, because the fact is USA still remain a very important market. It's a lucrative market for exporters, irrespective of the the tensions that are having that the two countries are having at the moment.
And I think you just answered my next question with regards to whether this does change the dynamic for South Africa, that we are finding ourselves in a place where we are performing at a rate in which we're performing without the US as a market. But you still mentioned the importance of keeping the US as a market in order for us to be able to expand even more for many of our exporters and our farmers in the country.
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, there's no way that any country that is like South Africa, that is export-orientated, will overlook US as a market. I mean, that's one of the it's a bigger market in reality, and the fact that it has quite a larger number of people, the consumers that are buying products, the likes of wines, the processed fruit juices and the citrus, of course. And because another thing is that for South Africa, remember that some of these products that, we are having tariffs on, they are counter-seasonal to the US market. So therefore, when we are ready for markets to sell, the US market, a local market, it doesn't have them. So it has sort of been strategic in a way. So it is why we are continuing saying that, irrespective of the growth that we are seeing elsewhere, because I mean, remember, South Africa is having a lot of farmers that are also getting into the market, getting ready for the export market to sell their products. So the bigger we get, more markets, including the US itself, is going to benefit everyone, because we already have larger commercial farmers that are really pushing to the export market. So, but therefore, if we are opening this market in the Asian and the Middle East, it's still fine. But the US itself is still going to remain quite an important one, especially if you are to look into specific commodities like the likes of sugar and industry strategies currently, out of having some issues. So those are some of the factors that we might, are kind of forcing us to not really overlook the US as a market, irrespective of the current problems that we are having.
So, I mean, with the growth in exports to Africa accounting for over half of shipments, what opportunities and challenges do you see in expanding intra-Africa trade?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and especially given the fact that in recent times in Africa, we are seeing a lot of protectionism, which is something that is also globally, in appearance. So with South Africa now, really pushing strides and trying to really expand the African continent, as a market, it's important for us because of the proximity and also, some of the infrastructure that has been developed. But I think most importantly would be, to have an even more open trade across all the countries, because in recent times, we are seeing a number of these, restrictions in a number of products, that are being traded within the continent. If we can have, that free trade really operating, I believe that South Africa will really, expand into the continent as much as we are already, it's already our bigger market, with the likes of Mozambique, Botswana, Namibia, and Zim, some of the leading markets, for South Africa. I think even moving up there, when we can have our things in place, would really see the benefits of trading within the continent, because really there's a market, it is bigger, but of course it's going to vary on what products can we sell and what products the continent itself is buying.
Most certainly. So Tabile, you spoke about lowering or removing some of those US tariffs. What do you think are the key factors that will influence South Africa's agricultural export performance in 2026 and beyond?
I think, we were looking at a promising year, to be honest. I mean, especially after the fact that we have seen that even though we have issues with the US, for instance, but generally things are looking, good for the country. And also, I mean, in terms of the products themselves, we are seeing a lot of rains that we have seen across the country. Actually, even Eastern Cape that has had recently, some problems. I've been seeing the past few days, some areas are even flooding. There's a lot of rain, so meaning the production part of things is going to be good. And when we have a good production, then it means we have larger products to export. And in fact, I also saw that, recent the projections for citrus, particularly the likes of oranges, are expected to be even larger again, larger than last year. That is, so those are some of the positives. But I think the factor, or at least the risk, still remains with the beef sector or the livestock, animal products because of the foot and mouth disease.
Yes.
Because at the moment, it is really an issue, that you're not going to be able to run away from. And at least there are things that are being, measures put in place. We are actually even now producing our own vaccines on top of what we're going to supplement in terms of buying them outside. So things are really looking positive. And of course, the trade agreement that we have signed with China, even though it's going to kick in after some time, but those are some of the positive moving forward, to 2026. But generally, the view or the look is actually not so bad for South Africa, and we're looking forward to it. But of course, the data with quarterly data that we're gonna always publish and see how things are going, and of course, opening other new markets in the likes of the Middle East, if it's possible. But there are really talks in terms of us expanding this market,
Right.
and of course, that is gonna help everyone within the sector.
All right, Thabile, thank you so much for your time and giving us your insights this morning. 277 billion rands in exports just in the year 2025. That was agricultural economist at the National Agricultural Marketing Council, Thabile Ngunjana.